Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. For 3 long chapters, Jesus has been struggling to get over the death of John the Baptist. Now, at last, he seems to be getting past his sorrow. And part of the reason is that he makes a trip to the north to Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi has 2 big advantages. One is it's about as far as you can get in Israel from Jerusalem, so far that even the scribes and the Pharisees don't follow him there. So he gets some peace at last. The second thing about Caesarea Philippi is it's very beautiful. It's set on the slopes of Mount Hermon, which is about 3 times higher than Table Mountain. Now, I've never been there. I've never been north of the Sea of Galilee. But even from Galilee, you can see the snow of Mount Hermon glistening in the distance. It's a very beautiful place. And on the slopes of Mount Hermon is a place we now call Bunia, where a beautiful stream bubbles out of a cave and into a lovely pool and down into a cool stream. It's probably the most beautiful place in Israel, and it's here that Caesarea Philippi was built. And it's here that Jesus finally finds peace and quiet. I had a Caesarea Philippi. For me, it was George in the wilderness area. One time in George, I saw a goods truck at the railway station, and it had stenciled on the side, "When empty, return to George." I took a picture of that and put it in my study, and that's what I did for years. When I was empty, I returned to George. Jesus has found his George. And in the midst of this peace and this beauty, Jesus broaches 2 subjects that he's not yet broached with his disciples. Firstly, he says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter gives his immortal answer, "You are the Christ, the Messiah." And in fact, in Matthew, he says more than that. He says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Now, in Matthew, that's quite shocking because Matthew was an Orthodox Jew, and he avoided using the word God if he could. Throughout Matthew, he talks about the kingdom of heaven, not the kingdom of God. And so Peter makes this great foundational statement, a statement that all of us need to take deeply into ourselves, that Jesus is Lord, because that will stand us in good stead for hard times. And Jesus makes a strange statement here. He says to the disciples, "Don't tell anyone." Now that is strange because telling people is going to be their life calling. Why at this stage did he say, "Don't tell anyone"? Just hold that question for a few moments. Now Jesus goes on to the second topic, and he tells them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. Now Peter doesn't like this, and as we know, he takes Jesus aside and rebukes him. Can you imagine that? This rough fisherman taking aside the person he's just called the Son of God and rebuking him. Peter wants the glory without the cross. And Jesus, in return, gives him the most stinging rebuke he ever gives to one of his disciples. "Get behind me, Satan." Peter's very eager to preach the victory and the glory of the Messiah. But he doesn't want to preach a rejected, despised, and killed Jesus. Do you notice, by the way, that they don't pick up the last phrase of Jesus, "On the 3rd day he will rise again"? They don't even hear that. And so we come back to the question, why did Jesus forbid them to tell that he was the Messiah? And I think the answer is that they have not yet taken in that his Messiahship involves suffering and death. They want the glory without the pain. Or to put it in the words of Bonhoeffer, they want discipleship without cost. And it's going to be a very long journey for Peter particularly. He's going to go through some very deep water before he learns this lesson. This big, strapping man who prides himself on his strength is going to deny his Lord in front of an insignificant servant girl. So Jesus forbids them because he knows it's going to take time for the essential truths to sink in. And they mustn't start preaching before it's matured. Paul made the same mistake, When he was converted, he immediately started preaching. He thought he was God's answer to the Jews. But do you know that in that period he didn't have a single convert? And in fact, at one point we read they were all very confused by his preaching. And eventually they let him down in disgrace over the wall in a basket. and he went off with the tail between his legs and spent 3 years in the wilderness. By the end of that time, it had matured and he could begin his preaching. And so at this stage, the disciples want glory without pain. They want discipleship without cost. And I'm very concerned about parts of the Christian church today, particularly the part called WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And I'm one of them, and I'm preaching very much to myself today. I'm very concerned how WASPs in certain parts of the world are stridently, even with shaking fists, demanding that their rights and their privileged way of life be protected. And I think the church is in danger of wanting discipleship without cost.